John, I think our long national nightmare might be coming to an end. Carlos Correa has yet a third deal to be a baseball player in 2023 and moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that after the exciting possibilities of going to the West Coast for a record $350 million, or then going to New York and switching positions for $315 million, he just goes back to where he was. The incumbent team, the Minnesota Twins, end up with Carlos Correa. So I think that's a kind of a twist ending to a tale that's been full of turns and twists.
Yeah, well, we'll cross our fingers, John, if it's actually the ending or not. We'll certainly cover every aspect of that. We'll talk to AJ Hinch, the manager of the Detroit Tigers, about his Tigers, other subjects like Justin Verlander and Carlos Beltran, and of course, what he thought about managing Carlos Correa. That's if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. Well, John, what we always hope for in all our various businesses, in the newspaper, on television, and now on our podcast, is that we have major news to discuss. And there was major news on Tuesday, January 10th. For the third time this offseason, Carlos Correa has an agreement with a team. In this case, it's a 6-year, $200 million deal with the Twins that could get up to 10 years and about $270 million. And I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you know the Odyssey, but just quickly, a couple of weeks into December, Correa signs agrees for 13 years at $350 million with the Giants. The Giants go as far as to call a press conference on the day of what's supposed to be the press conference. It doesn't happen, and it's revealed that they had real concerns about his physical, notably his lower right leg. He broke his fibula in 2014 when he was in the minor leagues. He has a plate in there, as you detailed first in the New York Post that night between the 20th and the 21st, while Steve Cohn's in Hawaii and Scott Boras is still in San Francisco. They work out an agreement for 12 years at $315 million. Lo and behold, the Mets have the same concerns with the physical. We've been in limbo since until today when the Twin deal gets done. John, that's a mouthful. It's a free agency like we've never seen before. Nobody has covered it as well as you have. If I just asked a big umbrella question to open, what stands out to you?
Well, the whole thing is very dramatic. I think it's interesting that they got the ankle okayed, I think, in advance on the Twins' physical. So he just has the rest of the physical to do as we're on this podcast, and presumably there's nothing wrong with the rest of them. And, you couldn't
only
have
27 more teams to go in case there is.
Yeah, well, you couldn't really have a third full physical and failing. So they had to make sure that he was going to pass. And, this was a team that had him. They know him. He was not out with any ankle concern for the season that he was there. And, maybe the Twins are willing to take a little bit more of a risk. They certainly could do a higher AAV. I mean, Steve Cohen does have some limits. Let's not forget that. There are some limits. The reason the Mets didn't want to do that $34 million a year and wanted to spread it out is because the tax situation. The Mets are in that 90% Steve Cohen tax. And if they gave him a $34 million deal or $33.4 million deal, his tax would have risen even more for the next 6 years. So they wanted to spread it out, and eventually they just weren't able to come to an agreement. The Mets wanted to mitigate the risk. They were the second team to raise a flag over this issue with the ankle. So you can't really blame them. I think they're upset right now. It's not a happy day in Mets land. All would have been fine if they never had come to this agreement, but they got the agreement for 2.5 weeks. The thought was they'd probably be able to work it out. Steve Cohen there was one of the richest men in the country, but even he has some limits, and you really can't blame him. They're already at $360 million payroll, right? So it's the record payroll, and the tax is going to be around close to $100 million. So can't blame him for being cheap. Can't claim that, but I think at the end there is some limit shown.
Yeah, John, why don't I follow your lead here? Let's talk about the Mets a little bit. Again, what stands out to me is your reporting that night, the night of the 21st in the New York Post, Steve Cohen talked about it, and he used the word need. This was what we needed. And I think it's because there, in a lot of ways, you could say the Mets held serve, right? They re-signed Diaz, Nimmo, Ottavino. They replace DeGrom, Bassett, Walker, Lugo with Verlander, Senga, Quintana, and David Robertson. You want to say at the margins, you bring in Rayleigh is better than Joely Rodriguez. Navarez gives them a better overall catcher than McCann. Those are marginal. I think that the owner of the team was willing to go to $500 million in total expenditure between both payroll and tax because he felt they, in his words that you quoted him, needed this player as a kind of 162 game, better than Eduardo Escobar, both sides of the ball. But as importantly, he's been a great postseason player. I think he has 16 homers in like 79 games. I wonder what you think about that, John.
Yeah, I mean, well, at the moment, he was very excited about the deal. When I talked to him, it was in the wee hours where we are in New York. It was 2:00 a.m., a little bit, 2:40, and so it was about 8:40 for him. And he was very excited, and he said we needed one more thing, and this is it. And this puts us over the top. I do like their other improvements. I know people aren't going to focus on that right now, but Verlander is more dependable than DeGrom. Senga is potentially a terrific talent. I think Quintana is consistent. Narvaez is going to give them more offense and at catcher. And I agree with you on the bullpen. I like some of the pieces there. Rayleigh's going to be an improvement, certainly over Joely Rodriguez. So, they had a 101 team, and there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this team. But this is a down day because they thought they were adding a superstar player who's got a great postseason pedigree.
Yeah, this feels a little bit like that day with the baseball giants, right? If you've never had them under your umbrella, so to speak, with the agreement, then it's not like there's a feeling of loss. In some ways, the Giants benefited by the Mets also agreeing with him and having the same problems. And John, I think you were making this point, and I agree with you 100% on this. If the Wilpons back out of this, we could talk about finances. But even backing out of this, I think he literally projects right now to have a $444 million payroll for next year. The Mets,
plus that, including the tax,
including the tax, all in. It's like just under $450 million, and by the end of the year, we'll probably go over that. And he was willing to go to the $500 million-ish to get this done. The Mets had to have real concerns about the leg because they badly wanted the player. And again, you're reporting, I think they were willing to offer like 160, was it, to keep him?
Yeah, 157.5.
With some navigation points to kind of maybe get back towards the 315 at the end of the day. So I do think one of the things that stands on the Mets side is, as disappointing as this day is, they were committed to try to do it. This isn't like the old days.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, Steve Cohen is committed to winning and doing almost everything that he can. And again, he didn't pull it at the end. He was still hoping to get the player. Time ran out. He said they were getting close to the end. We should have a resolution one way or the other. I think both sides felt that way. But Steve Cohen said that publicly to Tyler Ward, the YouTuber. And I think it made sense that somebody had to decide, was Correa going to take this deal for less money, get less guaranteed money in New York, or go back to where he was comfortable? The disappointment, part of the disappointment is it feels like he wanted to be in New York, even though he liked the Twin Cities. Very nice. He hits well. He plays shortstop there. Felt like he was okay with giving up shortstop. He was very good in third base in the WBC. He could take a little bit tougher ballpark. He wanted to go to the team that won 101 games and has that close to $500 million expenditure. At least they would have with him. So I think he did want to go, but ultimately it's difficult to leave $42 million guaranteed on the table. I know Trey Turner did it. I know Judge probably left that much or more, but doesn't happen very often, particularly when you've already been cut from 350 to 315. We're still going and going and going. How far down are you going to go? At some point, you got to, I understand it. And I don't know. I think the Mets may have been actually a little surprised that they didn't get him. But as Steve said, we're nearing the end here. Basically, it's going to be a resolution one way or the other, and it was the other.
Yeah, look, I think one thing we could guarantee here now is the Mets are in it for the next thing. I guess there's ways there where they can't, like Francisco Alvarez could like take off as the designated hitter as this kind of wild card, and they get the kind of offense from him they were hoping for Correa, and they don't need to do it. But the trade deadline, in case people don't know it, it moves from year to year now at the commissioner's discretion, is 6 p.m. on August 1st. It feels like sometime between now and then, the Mets will do something. Where do you think the Mets are right now, John? Do you think like they're now, okay, we weren't able to get the big piece. You're not going to find that between now and the beginning of the regular season. Let's see if we could, some of the finer points at the margins, like maybe trade Correa, get some pitching depth. Not Correa, Carlos Carrasco, 2 CCs beginning with Carlos. I'm sorry, John. That was a good catch. Good editing job there, John, in case the writing gig doesn't work out. Yeah, like where do you think they spin now, the Mets?
Well, they could do that. I think they could still improve the bullpen. It's at the margins at this point. There are some good relievers, Chafin or left. I mean, nothing's going to be like getting Correa. I know some people are saying, oh, he's not a superstar. Well, look at his postseason record. Look at the defense, the all-around play. He was a 5-WAR player last year, 7-WAR the year before. It's a major disappointment, and they're not going to be able to make that up this offseason. That said, Steve Cohen is bound and determined to make this team as good as possible. And you're right, at the trade deadline, they could certainly improve there. But I'm of the belief that they had a 101-win team. I think they're improved. I'd rather have Verlander than DeGrom. I'd rather have Senga than Taijuan Walker. I think they've done well. And their deals were pretty reasonable compared to some of the crazy deals we saw out there. I think they did a pretty good job with the deals. And they have a record payroll at $360 million or so. They should be happy, but it's going to take a day or two to get over this, I do think.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine to have a $360 million payroll and still not have everything, right? It's a reminder that there's no such thing as a perfect team. Let's talk about the Twins a little bit, John. You talked about the fact that there was some pre-physical work done here. He obviously played with them last year. Our belief is he'll pass this physical, right? And my favorite thing to talk about is the NBA. And I think of this a little bit like when I asked some friends of mine who know the league well, why did the Minnesota Timberwolves, give up so much to get Rudy Gobert? They said, well, no free agent would come here, right? No free agents come to Minnesota. We have to do our free agency through trades. And it feels a little bit like, you mentioned it. Correa didn't hate Minnesota, but he clearly was looking for coastal superpower, it seems, all things being equal. He wants to play on the big stage. He wants to play in the postseason. And it feels like Minnesota maybe was willing to bend and close their eyes, maybe even on a physical more than any other team, because who else would go there? Like they need this kind of break to get it. What do you think of that? And where do you think this leaves them in the AL Central? Are they big contenders because they have Correa? They weren't last year with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're willing to take a little bit more of a risk. At least they were in this case. I mean, certainly they had more room in the payroll. They weren't going to go over the luxury tax, or certainly the 4th tier Steve Cohen luxury tax. So they had more room. They took a chance with Buxton. They love Buxton, but, he's a risk, an injury risk. We know that without even giving him a physical, right? Because he's actually been out a lot. So, they're a team that's willing to absorb some risk. I think you're probably right. It's easier to get teams now to New York. I mean, players to New York. It felt like this offseason, a lot of the players wanted to go to New York. Obviously Bogaerts left Boston and went to San Diego, but for a huge payday, $280 million. It used to be a time when people loved going to California, but it seemed like a lot of players preferred New York, not just Judge, but several others. I think Correa, Rondon. We got Correa on our mind. Rondon with the Yankees did too. That's an advantage that the New York teams have. That said, Cohen has certainly spent a ton of money and he's going to expect a lot this year.
John, I'm wondering, as a way to kind of wrap this up a little bit, the other party we kind of like didn't specifically talk about to some degree is Correa himself. You were mentioning what a terrific player he is, especially in the postseason. He's a two-way player. Do you think at all there's some burden on him now as far as, hey, can you prove that this was all nonsense? That he is going to be a healthy player. It's now going to be part of his legacy one way or the other. He's at a pivot point. if he stays healthy the rest of the way, you can imagine, again, we'll see how things turn out for Carlos Beltran and see how people treat players who were involved with the 2017 Astros. But he's a Hall of Fame consideration kind of midway through his career. Is he going to have a back end of his career? It's one of the fascinating questions over the next 5 to 10 years. Were the teams that backed away from him right to back away from him? Or are the Twins the team that's right? He's a good gamble. Who is Carlos Correa, and what's it mean to his legacy?
Yeah, the injury situation is interesting because, like we've known, he hasn't missed any days with the ankle injury since the 2014 incident and surgery they had in the minor leagues. He hasn't received any treatment that we know about, and yet he was flagged by 2 teams, and certainly the second team wanted to guarantee half the money that they had originally offered. And so they must have seen something, but it seems to be all a projection. It's funny that Scott Boras, the agent for Correa, was able to work it out with J.D. Drew and J.D. Martinez and Magli Ordonez and Pudge Rodriguez with other teams and get the language that was agreeable to both sides. Here they were not able to do it. They were not even really that close to getting the agreeable language that both sides would sign off on. Whereas in those other 4 cases, now those were shorter deals, but none of those players ever got those injuries that there were concerns about. Pudge was a back, Maglio a knee, foot for J.D. Martinez. I don't remember what J.D. Drew was. I think it might have been a shoulder, but in those cases they worked it out. In the 2 cases of the Boston players, they both won the World Series in Boston. In Detroit cases, they both got to the World Series. Maglio and Pudge did. Rebuilt that team and it worked out. But of course, this is a longer deal. It's a different situation. We don't know exactly what's on that MRI. And even if we did, we wouldn't be able to interpret it. 2 different teams did say there is something going on here that they were concerned about in the future, down the road. I kept hearing down the road. So it's probably not in those first 6 years, because it seems like both teams were willing to go big for the first 6 years, particularly the Twins.
Yeah, the manager that Correa has played the most for in his career is A.J. Hinch, and he's joining us next, John. I just want to point out to our terrific listeners, we did tape this with A.J. Hinch this morning, Tuesday morning, when this was still a limbo situation. So if you hear to us talk about it vaguely and not know which way when we're talking with A.J. Hinch, it's because of that. But nevertheless, if you stick with the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman, A.J. Hinch was really informative on Carlos Correa, Carlos Beltran's Hall of Fame candidacy, Justin Verlander, and more. Stick with us on the show. John and I are thrilled to welcome A.J. Hinch, the manager of the Detroit Tigers, with us on the show. And A.J., I promise you, we are going to talk about the Detroit Tigers. I promise it. I vow. We are going to talk. But you just have a lot of ex-players in the news, no one more so right now than Carlos Correa, who was the championship shortstop with you in Houston and one of your better players, who at the moment we are talking, and we always want to try to make this evergreen on a podcast, is a in limbo player. You managed him for a long time. Your Tigers were very interested in signing him last year. I believe, you don't have to confirm this, that you offered him about a 10-year deal. The question with him is about his physicality, is about his ability, his durability. Do you believe that this player can play physically healthy for a long period of time?
Well, nice to see you guys, and also kickstart this with the hardest question that you want me to answer. We can't talk about
softballs on the show.
We're going to go harder than that. That's a warm up.
Obviously he's a great player and a great person, and I've got a long history with him. I have no idea what his medical file looks like, but I'm following the news like you guys are. I mean, I've been in touch with him just through the holidays, saying Merry Christmas and things like that. But great family guy. He can play in any market. We had him in our division last year when he was in Minnesota. I joked with him that he could have picked any division in the league and been fine, but he had to pick our division. You always root for guys, your ex-players, you become close with them. And it's funny. I've been in a lot of jobs in this industry, and I've had doctors and GMs and managers. We all think we're kind of experts on these medical processes. And And I've had some that say, hey, this guy's not going to last very long. And he's had, going on to a Hall of Fame career. I've also had others that have been crystal clear that their medical file is perfect and they've been on the injury list for the next, foreseeable future. So it's a moving target. Ever smarter people than me are going through it. But I loved having Carlos, and he's going to have a great career.
Well, as we talk about this right now, it looks like the Twins have some momentum in the talks. We will see. We don't have the resolution yet. Obviously, the Mets still interested, still working on it. I should ask you, sounds like you're a little bit in touch with him. You probably don't have the answer to, have you heard anything from him and where he's going? But
no,
the real question is, what about third base? If he goes to third base, I mean, I'm sure he worked out there some. I've seen your team in spring training a lot, or when you're with the Astros, and I saw Bregman worked out at short, he could play short, and I've seen Correa at third a little bit. What do you think? If he does go to the Mets, how would he be at third base?
So the only footage I've seen is at the WBC, when he played a dynamic third base, a few years ago. But in general, I will tell you this. I think players can play more positions than we give them credit. I mean, they may not be comfortable. They may not be perfect. But I think players can, especially elite players, can move around and be perfectly fine. Their baseball timing is good. Their skill sets, they will show through no matter what position you put them at. I've been a big proponent of multiple positions for a lot of times. Even my teams in Detroit, my teams in Houston, outside of a very, very few number of guys, I've tried to push that pretty hard. So players are adaptable. They will get them. Elite players that prepare the right way will get themselves in a position to be good wherever they put them. So he and others, I think, in the league would be just fine not playing their primary position.
AJ, you said something about Correa that really struck me. You said you love to manage him. There's been some thought that there are teams who don't want him for personality reasons. Maybe they don't think about sincerity. I've heard people say there's some comparison to Alex Rodriguez as a person. What do you? By the way, Alex Rodriguez, we got to point out, you played Major League Baseball. You were on a national team with Alex Rodriguez probably a couple of decades ago that represented the U.S. But what do you think about Carlos Correa, the person, fitting it into a clubhouse, being a leader and being a good guy to manage for whoever ends up with him?
Yeah, so I look at players through a couple of different lenses, and you start to see why players are good at what they do and why they're prepared and why they're the little small details that they pay attention to. How do they take care of their body? What's their nutrition like? What is their mindset? How their baseball IQ? And when you find the players that kind of pass the test in all of those categories, you start to realize like why these guys can stand up in the pressure, or why they can be big time performers, or why can they perform in the postseason, or what there's reasons behind all of that. And it starts with preparation. And I think as players are getting to the league such a young age, they have to develop those processes in the big leagues more so today than ever before. And when they figure it out, it kind of clicks for them. And Carlos is one of them. Obviously, other players that I had in Houston. I'm watching Miguel Cabrera in the last year of his career. This season, I'm seeing why different players are good at their craft, and it's how they prepare and how they take care of themselves. And I trust those players that are going to be good for a long time when you pass those tests.
We will get to the Tigers, I promise, but I'm going to ask you about an ex-Tiger right now who you managed in Houston, and that's Justin Verlander. Obviously we know he's an all-time great at this point. I mean, you had to be a little amazed at last year, 1.75 ERA, the best in baseball at age 39. And what do you see going forward for him? He's got a 2-year deal and he wants to play. I think he wants to pitch into his mid-40s. I don't know. He thinks he's Tom Brady, and maybe he is. I don't want to doubt him.
Yeah, I think he looks at Nolan Ryan more than maybe even Tom Brady. Okay. But Justin, I got to know him when we traded for him when I was in Houston, and then, went through a couple of years with him. He won the Cy Young in 2019, a great battle out with Garrett Cole. And then, the Tommy John surgery, I think all of us, I don't say we wrote him off, but we kind of made, oh man, that's sort of the pinnacle. That's when his career starts to change. And he defied those odds by coming back and being elite after Tommy John at his age. So again, the previous answer about preparing and the mindset and his game day routine is as intense as any player that I've been around. Now, I haven't been around him since 19, but I saw him last year in Detroit. We didn't face him when they came through our place, but I can see him, how he meticulously goes through his game plan, every pitch with a purpose. He trains well. He practices hard. His bullpens, I'm sure, have eased off a little bit since the 2019 season, but he doesn't do anything without a purpose, and he doesn't do anything without a plan. And you combine that with talent, and the talent that he's been able to maintain at his age, and you see the compete button get pushed every time, and that's why he's not going to be fazed by expectations or living up to a contract at his age. Like, he's so far past that anxiety. He is solely focused on the competition, and you can see that from afar. When I'm not managing him, when I did manage him, it's pretty intense on how he gets after the opponent.
AJ, I'm gonna, I think, complete the holy trinity of Astro player questions, and it's obviously a tougher question because it involved the 2017 Astros and Carlos Beltran being up for the Hall of Fame. Verlander was on the team. He was a pitcher. He didn't get the advantages. We know he's going to waltz into the Hall of Fame. We don't know about Carlos Beltran because of his ties to 2017. You paid a big price for it, obviously, with a suspension and a dismissal from the Astros, and been come back as one of the top managers in the sport. What do you think about Beltran's Hall of Fame? How much should that be held against him? What happened with you guys in 17?
Yeah, I think, and I've spoken out on this a lot, in that I will always apologize, for that situation. We were wrong. We continue to be wrong. There's no way to justify anything that, any rule that we broke and crossing the line competitively. And quite honestly, we're all going to continue to pay the price as we go around, and it's tagged along with us, as it should be. It's part of our legacy. It's part of our actions and inactions. What I can tell you is that we always are striving to remember that part and then showcase the best version of ourselves moving forward. A few of us that are still in the game have continued to get the opportunity to hopefully shed a light on who we are and what we can do positively in the sport and how we can impact the sport, while continually to show contrition for 2017. I think Carlos had a Hall of Fame career. I played with him when we were at the Royals together. He was one of the most dynamic players for a really long time. And obviously I'm super supportive of Carlos, the man, the family man, what I saw him grow into, how he built his family. And he's been relatively quiet about it all. I saw him a little bit last year in New York when he was helping with the Yes Network, doing the media. I hope he gets back in the game and stays in the game, stays connected. He's got a wealth of knowledge to help so many people throughout the game. And he didn't get a chance to manage, when he had the job in New York with the Mets. So I'm not a writer. I don't have a vote. I know his career was super dynamic, and I know at the end there's going to be a lot of questions. It's for you guys to sort out. But I think Carlos had a terrific career, and obviously deserves the consideration that he's getting for the biggest award.
Since we're on this subject, you're very apologetic about your time there, conciliatory. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. To me, at least the way I saw it, you were kind of fighting against it, and even at one point, I think broke a camera or something. You were fighting against it, yet you paid a big price. I mean, I kind of think I'm glad you bounced back with a job right away. I thought it would be with the White Sox, but it was with the Tigers. But and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and you feel like you really deserve to pay that price. But
yeah,
I personally thought you got a raw deal from the Astros.
I appreciate the respect, John. I was the manager. I was in a position to have a stronger hand and a stronger voice, and should have done better. I mean, I'm going to continue to say that for the rest of my career when anybody brings up 2017, because I believe it, and I was in a position to be an authority figure and to step up, and I feel like I failed that. I failed the game. I failed a lot of family, friends, teammates, that club. I was the manager, and I'm obviously responsible for everything that happens, under my watch. So I appreciate the notion, but absolutely will never feel like anyone was more responsible than me.
Just to close the book on this, I mean, I wonder what you think about legacy, since the Astros haven't stopped winning since then, including a championship last year. Obviously, Dusty Baker, the manager now. I wonder, does it do anything to say, would you have won in 17? Who knows? Like, it's, we can't re-legislate that, but it isn't like we took the air out of the Astros and the Astros stopped being a good team. Do you think it helps everybody's legacy that I think it's now six division titles in a row or something like that? It's all 6 ALCS in a row. It's 2 championships, including the last one. What does it do to everyone's legacy who was tied to that team?
Well, I think 2 things can happen at the same time. I mean, one, it was wrong. It continues to be wrong, and we, will always have this question around 2017. I also think you can say these guys are really good players. There's a really good system there. It was built, brilliantly. The additions after the fact have been really good. There's been a long run of success of winning in that organization, and rightfully so, with the talent that is in that organization, on the field, off the field, all around that club. So I think both things can happen at the same time. I don't think we can just simply turn our back away from what we did in 2017, but I also think you can't turn away and say these guys are not talented or not good players or have not continued their success, because the wins are there, the performance in the postseason's there. They have another World Series title. So very complicated era, but at the end of the day, the talent, I think, is speaking for itself.
Well, let's get to the Tigers now. In 2021, I thought you really overachieved even at that time, and now looks even more like you overachieved. Probably set people up for big expectations last year, and you had so many pitching injuries last year. And offensively, frankly, the team didn't perform, or basically almost all the players kind of underperformed expectations there. Where do you think the Tigers stand now? Are you potentially a contender in a year or two, or what's your timetable right now with the Tigers?
Well, I mean, first off, I think we did play well or better in 2021, which was my first year there. Last season, whatever could go wrong did go wrong, and now we're going through substantial change throughout the whole organization, really from the top down all the way through my coaching staff to a lot of different players. To refresh what the chance of bringing better times to Detroit. It's a great city, great fan base. They started to come alive a little bit throughout the 2021 season. Getting out of COVID was really important in that area. We come through and get the 500 homers for Miggy, get the 3,000 hit run for Miggy last season, but that was about the only thing that we were particularly proud of, with the exception, maybe our young talent got some experience to build from last season. So now I have a new boss. We have a new structure, half of my new coaching staff. We made so many changes to where things need to feel differently before they're going to be different on the field. And we expect to win as many games as we possibly can. I didn't sign up to aim for a season that's in the future. I want to win now, and we feel like we can make steps towards that, particularly with our young talent getting to the big leagues and earmarking some at bats for them while we're getting healthy on the mound. We need Mize and Skubal to come back. We obviously made some additions on the pitching staff to stabilize some things. Scott Harris has made some trades to supplement that offense that we weren't very good last year. So there's some things that need to go our way. But on the field, as the manager, I can't sit here and aim towards contending any other situation than today. Like, we need to win the day's game. We need to win a series. We need to win some months. I mean, I've said this for a couple of years. I think this team will resonate with that. And then at the end of the year, we'll tally up the wins and see where we're at. But I don't want to lose. And I don't want to aim for next season or the season after that or the season after that. That mindset has to be established on our club and our clubhouse. And then we'll let the results be what they are.
AJ, just to loop a little back, is you guys did try to get Correa last offseason. When you didn't, you signed Javy Baez to a 6-year, $140 million contract as kind of a tentpole player, right? Like, this is a guy where the veteran, as our young players are coming up. And aside from a strong September, it wasn't a very good season for Baez last year, really on either side of the ball. And we always think of him as such an exceptional defender. Do you still believe in this player? And if so, why?
Yeah, no, I believe in Javi, and as does our organization, because of the talent that he has. Is really spectacular. Like the numbers won't lie on to what he struggled with last year on defense with the throwing, and what the April and May was really a tough start for him. He had to climb out of such a bad hole that he was in. Had a thumb injury early, didn't perform all that well, then started to come out of it as the weather warmed up, and as we got into September, he finished pretty strong. So, but the player's dynamic. He can do a lot of different things. We talk about that baseball timing, baseball acumen, baseball IQ. It's off the charts good. We've got to get him inside the strike zone. We also got to get him focused inside the game a little bit for that to flourish. He knows that. We've talked about it. I've had a chance to sit down with him this winter and kind of just decompress from what was a really tough year for him, to get him kickstarted for next season. The WBC is gonna start his season a little bit earlier than in previous years. That will probably enhance his readiness to be timed up to start the season off a little bit better. But he's a dynamic player, and certainly any given day you come to the field and you watch Javy Baez, and you guys watched him a little bit in New York when he was with the Mets, he has a chance to impact the game and do something that you may never have seen before on the field. Our job as coaches is going to be to extract that out of him more consistently than ever before.
Baez was actually great as a Met. Other than that one incident with the thumbs down, everything was great. That seemed to overshadow it for whatever reason, but he showed incredible talent. So I kind of with you. I believe in him as well. But to really give the Tigers fans some hope, I think you need to have some of these young players become cornerstone players. Speaking of Torkelson and Skubal, maybe somebody else you can name. Who in particular stands out as somebody who I think you believe will be at least a cornerstone player, if not a franchise player for the Tigers?
Yeah, no, I think Riley Green is got every skill set on the field. He's also got the personality, kind of the vibe around him to be an influential part of a team. I think when you're around these guys, almost what is it, 15, 18 hours a day, and you're going into all these different games, these experiences, you're on planes, you're on buses with these guys, you get a sense of who's impactful kind of in around your club. And the more we play the game like Riley Green, the better we're going to be. He's a very dynamic player in center field. We lost him last year at the very end of spring training. He was going to be told that he's going to be on the major league team, and he fouls a ball off his foot off of Garrett Cole, and then hits a triple off the center field wall, gets to third, starts kind of messing with his foot a little bit, comes off the field after he scores and tells me his shoe's filling up a little bit, ended up breaking his foot. And he was out for the first few months. It's a very delicate injury to rehab. But the impact on that club last year was like we lost like our middle of the order bat, our 10-year veteran guy, our presence, our sort of personality. And that's when it struck me last season what this kid can really grow into be. He doesn't need to be that right now. We've got to surround him with other players that can help him grow and mature at this level. But I saw firsthand a team get a little demoralized over the loss of a rookie. Like that doesn't happen in our sport, as much as people would imagine. So Spencer Torkelson, we need him to come back from his first year of learning and the up-down season that he had, first overall pick. The talent's real. The offensive profile can be super impactful, but it wasn't a steady climb of success that went straight up. He had to deal with a little bit of adversity, probably for the first time in his short career. So those two are certainly cornerstone type players that I think we can nurture, we can grow, we can see those guys being in the middle of our of everything that we're doing, with our club. I do think you bring up Mize and Skubal. We get Spencer Turnbull back. We sign Michael Lorenzen. We get Matt Boyd. We sign him back, and he'd been a longtime Tiger. A lot of our team is going to be stabilized by the volume of pitching that we can throw at you night in and night out. Last year we had 17 starting pitchers. I don't care what team you are, how good you are. That's not a recipe that you want to repeat. So the healthier that we can keep that rotation, Eduardo Rodriguez hopefully has a full season this year. We get Austin Meadows back. Who knows what's possible, but I know how we're going to play, from a preparation standpoint and from a style standpoint.
You mentioned how you're going to play. I mean this sincerely. There's few people whose baseball brain I'd rather pick on something like new rules than yours, AJ. You're always so insightful on this kind of stuff. And as a way to wrap up here, we could go rule by rule, and we'll be here for the rest of Miguel Cabrera's career. It's not. So I wonder if I just said, I'm sure you've put this all into your brain, into your lab. What among the new rules sticks out for you? Why, and what are you doing about it as the Detroit Tigers?
Well, I think the two things that I'm kind of fascinated by, they're kind of intertwined, is the pitch clock is going to be, we're going to be able to adjust the pitch clock. Every minor league player has been able to do it. The major league players will be able to do it. I think the position players on the hitting side are going to have a little bit of a longer adjustment, just because, if you go back, and we're probably take you back too far, like the Nomar Garciaparra, like batting gloves, the David Ortiz sticking out and kind of letting the moment build up. There's just, I can go through so many different players that have these little nuances at the plate that are allowed, and it's actually part of the theater that no longer is going to be allowed. I think that's going to be a little bit adjustment, but they'll adjust. Like the players, once there'll be a couple confrontations in spring training, maybe it bleeds into the season, the players will be fine. The disengagement rule on the pickoffs, I think, is going to be something that we're going to need to adjust. We're going to have a Zoom with Major League Baseball and have our coaches all get up to speed with what exactly that means, on how many times you're stepping off, or how many times have you seen the catcher give signs, even with the new technology, and all of a sudden have to step off and reset like that. With a runner on base, that natural instinct to stop play is going to be a little bit dangerous when it comes to, like, if a fast runner's at first and I mess up the signs and I step off, like, how does that impact the at bat on how many balls I can throw over to first base to stop a fast runner? Miles Straw in Cleveland, we know he's going soon, and if I waste one of those step offs with having to reset the signs, it's going to create a little bit of chaos. The other part of the rules that come up is the shift is going to be very interesting, and I know it's a spirited debate on, is it going to really make much of a difference? We are going to have to figure out where to position that second baseman. Do we play him in the hole? Do we play him sort of how the game was taught to us, where the two guys are equidistant, or in the middle of the infield, and you had the corner infielders? I think that's going to play a little bit more into where we position that guy with a runner on first. The first baseman is at first base, and I got a pull hitter. Am I going to put him in the 4 hole, or am I going to expose the double play, where if the ball is hit to shortstop, I no longer can cover second? Or am I going to put him at traditional second base and leave that gaping hole in the 3-4 hole open for the left-handed pull hitter? Those little things are going to have to be sorted out. And I think back to the last time I was a manager, when we weren't shifting, was like my first year in 2009. We were a little bit, I guess, slower in Arizona, where it wasn't quite mainstream to move everybody all over the place. I can't remember the last game I managed that didn't have that overshift to offset that advantage of having a runner on base, or the extreme pull ground ball hitter, or putting the second baseman in short right field. That to me is going to be fun, I guess, to sort out how to keep him on the dirt, but put him in a position where the most ground balls are hit, and not concede the double play on the pull left-handed hitter.
Yeah, AJ, I think you just talked about why we're about to enter perhaps the most fascinating spring training, certainly of our careers, our lifetimes, because there's going to be a lot of learning that needs to be done, and a lot of players aren't going to be in spring training for a lot of the learning. They're going to be off doing the WBC, as you mentioned. Baez on your team, I think half the Met team is going, a third of the Yankee team. So I do think we're about to do that, which means when we circle through Lakeland, we're probably going to have a lot of conversations with you, AJ Hinch, that extend from today. So John and I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show. Best of luck in spring training and in the
Awesome.
2023 season.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys covering the sport.
John, AJ Hinch didn't have the advantage that we have right now. We know Carlos Correa has reached an agreement with the Twins. Nevertheless, AJ was fascinating about Carlos Correa, Carlos Beltran, Justin Verlander, some of the stuff that's changing in the game, his own Tigers. What stuck out to you about the interview?
Yeah, I mean, great guest as we expected. Good get by you. We enjoyed talking to AJ Hinch. He talked all about all those players, including Correa, which was very interesting. But to me, the most interesting thing was when I asked him about 2017 and suggested to him that he got a raw deal in 2017 because he really wasn't on board with all that garbage banging and all that other garbage stuff. And he said no, that he should take the hit and he takes full responsibility and he'll live with that for the rest of his life. And, you know, I thought that was a terrific answer. And that's just the kind of guy that he is.
Yeah, maybe Trevor Bauer should go to the school of accountability and use that as a highlight reel for how to handle his situation. I'll say this, John, even with him not knowing about Correa, you know, Correa is part of the 2017 team. Also, they're staying on him for that. There's now concern about his physicality. But the manager who managed him most and knew him best, there's always concerns about Correa, the person, if he's sincere, things like that. And this manager clearly loved having Correa. He thought he was all baseball, gym rat, prepared, thoughtful, good teammate. And I do think that the Twins, who knew him also, are willing to go back with him. So I think it says something about Carlos Correa.
Yeah, and the Astros did make an offer. I believe it was 160 over 5 at that time. We poo-pooed it because we figured he was getting 300, and he almost did twice or few times. Yeah, I don't find Correa to be insincere. I do think he's a very, very hard worker. He's very, more than enthusiastic. He's ebullient. I can remember the first day in spring training with the Twins. He was so excited to be there, and nobody figured that he was going to end up there on a short-term deal.
Did he hug you? I think he hugged you.
Did hug me. Yeah, well, we're, you know how that,
You're tight. You're tight.
Yeah.
You're tight with all the superstars.
Yes. Well, you know, we're very similar.
Yep. Well, John, you know, we appreciate everyone joining us on the show, which is a podcast from the New York Post. Who knows, next Tuesday we might be talking about another failed physical. Like, you know, the saga never ends. I have a feeling this one's going to be okay for Correa, but, you know, you should stick with us every Tuesday. On Wednesday, the Yes app, we drop on that about noon each Wednesday. The show cannot be done. It's been taped a couple of times today, and that's just through the diligence and excellence of our colleagues, Jake Brown and Andrew Hart, who have helped navigate us through this. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Give us a 5-star rating. And don't forget to join us every Tuesday to talk baseball on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.